welcome back to Book and Prejudice. My name is Matt, and today I am going to talk about all of the books that I read in May and all of the books that I want to read in June. And yes, I am aware that it is the middle of the month and that this doesn't make any sense anymore, but this is honestly one of my favorite videos to make, and you know what? Sometimes you just have to go with it. Anyways, let's get started with the first book that I read in May, which is A Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. And I love this book so much. Let me talk about the book first and the actual physical book, and then I'll talk about the story, because this copy is so beautiful. My fiance got it for me in an airport, and he got it for me in Spanish, and I'm so happy because I love reading in Spanish even though I don't get to do it much. And also this copy is beautiful and it matches perfectly my copy of Circe. The copy that we had in English is so ugly in comparison to this one. So ugly. He got this without consulting, and this is what happens when you buy mismatched books. You end up having to get a third version or a second version of the book so that it matches the aesthetic of the bookshelf. But yeah, this is so much nicer than this one. We don't care about that. Well, we don't. This one. And it's in Spanish, and that's great. I love reading in Spanish. Even though the book is originally in English, I loved the fact that I got to read it in Spanish because that's my language. Okay, the story. The story as well, it's stunning because it talks about the story of Achilles and Patroclus, their relationship, their friendship, how they go from childhood all the way until Achilles' death, which is not a spoiler because it's the story of the Iliad. But I love this book so much. I really like how tragically beautiful their friendship and their romantic story is. I think that Madeline Miller, she always manages to bring a sense of humanity to characters that are not prioritized. She did the same thing with Circe. She talked about her not as being the first witch and all of the negatives, but rather her being this independent woman living her best life in an island and just every now and then getting visitors and, you know, treating them accordingly to how they treat her, if you know what I mean. So I really liked this, and I also really liked getting the twist on the Iliad, because I know the Iliad quite well. I really think it's a great book. I loved it, but I have to say this is a really good reimagining of it, because sometimes when you read these classics, you don't really think much about the secondary characters because they're so famous for their principal character. So I really appreciated having this to kind of complement the already well-known story of Achilles and, you know, Troy and all of that jazz. So I really thought that this was a great book. I think I gave it 5 stars actually, so 10 out of 10 would recommend. I really enjoyed it. I think that anyone who likes Greek mythology has to read Madeline Miller because she's just so good at it. Oh my god, she's fantastic. So, this is the first book that I read. The second book that I read was A Darker Shade of Magic by V. Schwab. I also really liked this one. I gave it 4 stars, I believe. And I thought that this was a great book. And I thought, honestly, that it could have been a great standalone. I know that she did a trilogy. I'm currently finishing the second one, which, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I read this one and I loved it. I thought it was very interesting. The dynamic between Kel and Lila and how they interact with each other and the changing POVs was really interesting. However, I will say, and I will admit, that I did find Kel's POV a bit broody at points. He was always very stressed out and very sad and very worried about everything. So I really enjoyed a lot more Lila's POV because she was like, no, let's just go and have adventures. And as well, I love Holland in this book. I think that he's such a good character because he's a villain without actually being a villain, and I think that that is magnificently accomplished. And also, frankly, the imagery within this book is fantastic. The whole concept of 4 Londons, 4 worlds, each of them being completely different, and the detail in which it is explained is insane to me. V. Schwab does a really good thing because I didn't like the way she categorizes them. There's Red London, Black London, White London, and Grey London. So Red London is where Kel is from and it's full of magic. Black London is a dead world, so those two kind of make sense. But then White London is a dying world, but and like everyone's just very pale, and that's why he calls it White London, which I think is just a bit judgy. As someone that's generally very pale, like a bit judgy. And then Grey London's just that because he's dull, and I just find it hilarious that this man just walked around and was like, this is a very dull city. I'm just gonna call you Grey London, and this is a very dying city, and you know what is white when it dies? People. So you're White London, and Black London's just black because it's dead, and then Red London is just because I like red. It's brilliant. I just thought it was really funny the way V Shop did it. I just really liked it, and I loved the concept of the code. Everything about this just was so inspiring. The magic world, the world building, the fantastic elements intertwined with real life and real London life. I live in London as well, so I know a lot of places that he's mentioning, a lot of the streets and stuff, and I found it very funny to think of what if like the Thames, which is like a 5-minute walk from my home, was red and full of magic. I thought it was crazy. I really enjoyed it. So I would really recommend it. I'm currently reading the rest of the series, but I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who is searching for a new fantastical world to get immersed for. I know that during the summer holidays a lot of people is when they choose to read series. By a lot of people I do mean myself, and this is a great one to start your summer holidays off really well. Also, it's just really funny. Like the lack of competence between their two humors is hilarious to me. Like Lila will make a joke and it will just fly over Kel's head. It's hilarious. I'm really liking it. And lastly, I read Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. This dude wrote Fight Club. And you know, I thought about making the classic joke of the first rule about Fight Club, you don't talk about Fight Club. I'm not talking about the book, but I have a lot of opinions about it, so let's not do that. Let's not be cliche. I gave it 3 stars, and there's some things I really like and some things that I really disliked. This is the first book I actually annotated. It's done on post-its because it's Greg's copy, not mine, and he doesn't like it when I write on the books, even though I did write on it. Oh, I didn't. I have to do that. I write the name of the book club and the month and the year. I have to do that now. He's not gonna like it. But yes, I annotated this book because I was just fascinated by it. And I got my book club journal by Books and Quills. So, and this is the first book that I talked about. So let's see what my thoughts were for this book, shall we? A ver. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I read it in 12 days and I really liked it, but this is what I got from it. I thought that it had a really interesting theme of toxic masculinity and having to be this big fighter, and all of the men that participate in Fight Club all have this really high ego and they all think of themselves higher than thou, and you know, all of this very toxic masculinity associated, basically. I also thought that it really was a great critique of capitalism, and I'll explain why. The reason why this guy, who's the main character, who we never find his name, at least I don't think we do, and his friend, what was his name again? Tyler. I always forgot his name. For me, he should have been called Andrew. So in my brain, I was just reading Andrew. Anyways, Tyler was a product of the monotony from capitalistic work life. Meaning, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm not saying, you know, everyone having a work is bound to fight against this monotony, but he was doing very basic jobs as working in a movie theater or working in service catering, I don't know how it's pronounced, and all of these jobs were very monotonous, and as a result of that he created this Fight Club, and then this Fight Club that evolved into basically a terrorist gang, basically. And I thought it was fascinating to see how desperate people are to have something in their lives that will give them an edge over everything else, because frankly, a lot of times people don't realize or realize too late that they're unhappy in their jobs, and that's completely fine. You know, people are going to be unhappy in what they're doing always. There's always going to be someone that just doesn't like their job, but the way they react to this unhappiness, I think that's where the toxic masculinity comes within. And I thought it was great critique of the society. I think this book was written a few years ago, I think in the 1990s or 1980s. So it's a great critique of the boom of work a lot and the American dream and all of that. Let me check what other things I found. Oh, yes. I really like the morality of the book. I'll explain this as well. Tyler has his own moral compass, which is completely opposite to my moral compass. Let's just get that out of the way. However, I kept thinking, what he's doing is wrong, but he's doing it through his morals. So technically, if he's not being morally corrupt at all, because he's convinced that what he's doing is right. And throughout all of the book, this really screwed with my head, because I was just like, what he's doing is wrong, but he's so convinced that what he's doing is right, that how can we blame him? How can we get angry? How can we not empathize with what he's saying when this is a man that's fully convinced that he's in the right and that what he's doing and what he's saying is correct and is the correct response to the circumstances surrounding his life. So I struggled a lot with painting him as a bad guy, even though he very obviously was not the best, because all I kept thinking was, this is a man who's convinced that what he's doing is right. There was no doubt in my mind that he wasn't convinced, and that I found very interesting as someone that's really interested in philosophy and philosophical texts. Is he morally wrong just because his morals are different to my morals or the morals of the society we live in? I don't know. I'll leave it up to you. That's what my whole degree was about, by the way. Is this morally correct? Anyways, those are the 3 books that I read in May. I know that I only talk about 3. I realize that I just read 3 books in a month, and I'm pretty happy with that number. I think it's pretty high. I've read more books thus far than I read in all of 2020, so I'll take it. And now we're going to talk about all of the books that I want to read for June. First of all, A Gathering of Shadows by V. Schwab. This is the 2nd book in the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy. I'm almost done. I have like less than 100 pages left because it is the middle of the month. But I am loving this book so far. I think I was convinced that A Darker Shade of Magic could have been a standalone, and when it closed, I thought it wrapped up really nicely. And I was like, what is she going to do now? Because I would have probably just left it at that. And then she started writing this book, and this book is freaking awesome. Like, she just, so good. She's just going for it. She's given a complete big twist of the story, and I'm just really enjoying it. I will talk about it more in my June wrap-up, but thus far, it's amazing. I also want to read the last one of the V. Schwab Darker Shade of Magic book series, which is A Conjuring of Light. I don't know what this book is about, because when you read a series and you read the back of a book, you get unnecessary spoilers that I don't particularly want, so I'm just going to let you guys know that I'm going to read this. Wait, something fell. Oops. I also want to read Conversations with Friends if I have time. This is not like something that I'm going to read 100%, but if I can, I would like to read this because I don't want to have to read it over the summer. I don't want to read this. My fiance said to read it. I'm going to read it out of pure love, and that's about it. So this is also a book that I'm going to be reading in June, hopefully. And lastly, I'm so excited for this one. It was my friend Celia's turn to choose a book club book, and she chose If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm so happy she chose this book because her and I have been talking about this book for ages, and she's always said, oh, I'm gonna put it, and then she was like, I don't think I'm gonna say it as my book club, and I was so angry, and I was like, you have to say it because it's not my turn for 2 more months, so you have to say it. And she did, and I love her very much for it. This book is a bit like The Secret's History by Donna Tartt, which I loved. And it is about a guy who just served 10 years for a murder he may or may not have committed. And then there's a detective that is retiring and wants to know what really happened the night of the crimes, or the day of the crimes. So I'm really excited to read this. I love dark academia books. I think that I love the entitlement and the secrecy and the thriller aspect of these books, and I just really, really enjoy reading them. I think that those are probably my favorite books after YA, because I'm just really like YA fantasy books. I just really do. But yeah, those are all of the books that I read in May, all of the books that I want to read in June, and I'm very excited to kind of get through with them because I find them so fascinating, all of them. I'm loving the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy. I think I'm going to love If We Were Villains, and I'm very excited for Greg to stop bothering me about conversations with friends. But yeah, those are the books. I think that I'm gonna stop now because there's not much more for me to say, but thank you very much for watching. As always, feel free to follow me on Instagram for more bookish content at Book and Prejudice, and until next week.